Dyslexia is the most common cause for reading, writing and spelling difficulties. Now, this morning, we put the focus on some of the coping mechanisms that people with dyslexia can put in place in order to cope with everyday demands. We'll also touch on what caregivers can do to support dyslexic learners keep up with their schoolwork during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown. Sharon Gerken is the Managing Director at the Dyslexic Association of South Africa. She joins us now via Skype to help us discuss this topic in detail. A very good morning to you, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning.
Let's first...
how are you this morning?
Well, I'm great, Sharon. It's good to have you with us this morning. Let's first discuss what dyslexia is and what are the telltale signs are.
Okay, well, it's often a very misunderstood condition. Dyslexics are not less intelligent than their peers, but we struggle to keep up with the amount of schoolwork or the amount of reading and writing that is associated with everyday life. Dyslexia comes from the brain, and it's not, we know that it's not reversal of letters. We know that it's to do with the sound of the language. It's the part of the brain that does the sounding of language. So that processes words and puts them on page. It's definitely, we look at children that are really intelligent and verbally they can keep up, but they cannot seem to read. They just don't recognize the sounds. They just fall further and further behind in school. And if you have to say to them, what do you understand about your classwork today? What did you learn today? They can tell you. But as soon as it's down on a page, they can't. They really, really battle to understand the written word.
Even though most children are ready to learn the basics of reading and writing at kindergarten or even first grade, but I understand that children with dyslexia often cannot grasp the basics of reading. So then one wonders then, when is it time to see the doctor? Is it a condition that can be, curable?
You know what, I think we know that it's a genetic factor almost, and that it's a lifelong condition. You can't outgrow it, but can you learn how to read? Yes. And the sooner we get it acknowledged, and especially in South Africa, is that so many parents don't know about it. If we see that our children are falling behind, your best bet is to go, if in an area, if you don't have a medical aid, if you can't afford to go to an educational psychologist, get hold of your social worker from your area and ask for an assessment, an educational assessment, because the government does allow a lot of accommodations for these children. But if we do not get them diagnosed, we cannot get them help.
And the levels of severity, they vary. And the fact that, you can't discover the fact that your child is dyslexic up until kindergarten, and does not then open up to, the fact that you don't know what is wrong with your child, and there's issues of late detection of this.
You know what, in both my boys, a lot of dyslexics, when it's not severe enough, you start to see the small lags, but then you think, maybe they're just naughty, or they're not listening, or they're not paying attention. But these processes, they get worse and worse. If a child is sorely dyslexic, we pick it up early at kindergarten. But a lot of the cases is that we don't pick it up early, and these children just fall further and further and further behind. And we as parents often seeing it as they're being stupid, or they're not trying hard enough, or the school can't cope with them and they get naughty. And it's definitely not that. It is the fact that they are battling to cope with the amount of reading and writing.
And speaking of parents and how they should be taking care of their dyslexic children, let's talk about caregivers then, who now have the task of, to homeschool their dyslexic children. Where do they even start?
You know what, it's essential that we get the brain to read. We know that the brain can relearn, So what happens is if your child is really struggling to learn, don't go to their grade that they're on and try and make them read that. Get easier readers. Sit with your child. Read to your child. What nobody tells us dyslexics is, why is it so important that I learn to read? You force a child to read without acknowledging to them why it is so important that they learn to read. You cannot do a thing nowadays if you can't read. If you explain to your child, I know that it's difficult. Let's start really at the beginning of reading and writing. And if we don't have money to get an occupational therapist and a speech therapist and send them to special schools, where do we start as parents? And we start off with the very basics, going back to what we learned as children, going back even to grade 1 level and introducing reading. Read with your children, help them to understand the sounding in the language. Go back to basics. We have to overlearn things as dyslexics to remember them, to be able to put them into context. Just overlearning, overdoing helps us to get them into our brains.
All right, Sharon, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for chatting to us this morning. All right, many thanks to the Dyslexic Association of South Africa's Managing Director, Sharon Gerken. We were just in conversation about helping dyslexic pupils cope during the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown.